I heard her stand up. In a hall of 400 people who had spent 3 years pretending she was dead, I was the only one who heard the scrape of the old iron throne and knew, before anyone gasped, exactly whose weight had just left it. Her name was Aveline. She had been the Alpha Sovereign of the Grey Marches, and then she had been nothing, a forgotten woman in a ruin, a story the new regent told to frighten children. I stood at the very back of the coronation hall, where a blind beggar woman is allowed to stand, and I could not see the crown or the usurper or the 400 turned faces. I did not need to. I heard her cross the whole length of that hall on the uneven step I would have known in a country of 10,000, and I felt the air move when she stopped in front of me, and I smelled cedar and sea salt and cold iron, and 3 years fell away in a single breath. She took my face in both her hands.
Welcome, everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
And into a silence so complete I could hear my own heart, she said 3 words she had needed 3 years to remember. I see you. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I want to back up first, because if I only tell you that, you will think a queen came back from the dead and rescued a blind girl. And that is not what happened. I was not rescued. I spent 3 years being the only person in the world who refused to forget her, tending a woman who did not know my name, holding a truth I was not allowed to say, and waiting for years for her to find her own way back to me. Because a love you take from someone by telling them it is theirs is not love. It is a leash. So let me back up. Let me tell you how I learned to see her without eyes, and how I lost her, and how I got her back, the only way that would ever have been real. Let me back up. My name is Wenna Crowe. I was 26 years old that spring, and I have been blind since I was 4. There was a fever, the kind that swept the low quarter every summer, and it left most of the children in the ground and left me alive with my eyes clouded over, pale as milk glass, seeing nothing but a soft gray light that never resolves into anything. I do not remember color. I do not remember faces. People think that is the great tragedy of me, and they are wrong. The tragedy of me is that people decided very early that a girl who cannot see also cannot know. And so they said things in front of me they would never say in front of a sighted woman. And they moved me around their lives like a piece of furniture. And I learned the whole shape of the world by everything they did not think I could tell. Here's what they never understood. I do see. I just do not see with my eyes. I see with the 11 inches of air a person displaces when they lean toward me, and the 12 when they lean away. I see with the particular weight of a footstep, whether it lands to be heard or lands to be hidden. I see with scent, which is the most honest thing a body owns, because a mouth can lie and a scent almost never can. I am an omega, and my kind reads scent the way sighted people read a face, and being blind only sharpened it, until I could walk into a room and know who was afraid, and who was lying, and who had been crying an hour ago, and washed their face to hide it. I could not tell you what my own hands looked like. I could tell you the exact moment a person stopped meaning what they were saying. That is a kind of sight. It is the kind that matters. I came into the sovereign's household at 19 to work the still room, grinding herbs no one thought a blind girl could confuse. And that is where I first met the woman the whole realm would later agree to forget. The Grey Marches was an old, cold kingdom on a gray sea, ruled for 100 years by the House of Aveline's blood, and Aveline herself was the last of it, an alpha sovereign of 40, unmarried, unbonded, with a reputation for a mind like a winter blade and a temper she almost never spent. I want to be careful here, because the whole realm later agreed to remember her as a tyrant, and she was not. She was hard the way a seawall is hard, because the thing behind her was worth defending. When she walked into a room, the alphas of her court measured themselves against her and came up short, and the omegas either feared her or wanted her, And I, grinding rue in a dark still room, did neither, because I could not see the crown or the height or the winter blade face that made everyone else forget she was a person. I only knew her by her scent and her step, cedar and sea salt and cold iron, and an uneven walk. She had taken a wound to the hip in some old border war, long healed, that made her left foot land a half-beat slow. In a palace of gliding, silent courtiers, hers was the one step in the world I could find in the dark. She found the still room by accident, the first winter, looking for something to help her sleep. And she found a blind girl who did not stand up and stammer and bow, because a blind girl cannot see a crown to be frightened of it. I just kept grinding, and I told her the valerian was on the third shelf, and I told her it would not work as long as she kept her jaw clenched like that, which I knew from the sound of her breathing. And there was a long silence. And then, for the first time in a very long time, I heard the Sovereign of the Grey Marches laugh. She came back the next night, and the next, not for the valerian. She would sit on the stool by the door. I heard the wood take her weight, heard the half-beat foot settle, and she would talk, in that low, even voice, about things a sovereign is not allowed to say to anyone who can repeat them. And a blind stillroom girl, everyone knew, was as safe as talking to a wall. That is what she thought she was doing at first. I could hear it, talking to a wall. It took her most of a winter to understand that the wall was listening better than anyone in her court ever had, because I could not be distracted by her face or her rank, only by the truth of what she actually said. Somewhere in that winter, she stopped talking to a wall and started talking to me. I heard the exact night it changed. Her voice came down half a register and slowed, and she asked me a question instead of just speaking, and she waited for the answer as if it weighed something. There was one night in that first winter I have kept apart from all the others, because it is the seed of everything that came after. She had been talking a long while, some trouble of the court, some knot of loyalty and threat she was working at aloud, and she stopped in the middle of it, and there was a different kind of silence. And she said, out of nowhere, "Do you know you are the only person in this whole palace who has never once looked at me?" I said, "My lady, I cannot look at anyone." And she said, "I know. That is what I mean." And she was quiet, and then she said the thing in a low voice, half to herself. "Everyone else in my life has looked at me and seen the crown, or the height, or the winter blade they have all agreed I am. And they arrange themselves around the seeing of it, and I have never once, not since I was a child, been in a room with a person who did not see all that first. You cannot see it at all. You have only ever had the rest of me. And I have found that I would rather be known by the one person who cannot see the crown than admired by every person who can." I did not know what to say to that, so I said the truest thing, which was, "I see you better than they do, my lady. I see you by everything you cannot hide, the step and the jaw you clench when you cannot sleep, and the way your voice goes down half a register when you have stopped performing and started meaning it, which it did about an hour ago. I see all of that. I just do it without my eyes." And there was the longest silence of that whole winter, and then I heard her stand, the half-beat foot, and come across the still room, and she did not touch me. She was always, in those early days, so careful not to touch me, but she stood close, closer than she had ever stood. And she said, very quietly, "Then you are the only one who has ever seen me at all. Keep doing it." And she left. And I stood in the dark with the pestle in my hand and understood that I was in a great deal of trouble and that I did not want to be saved from it. I am not going to give you the whole of that first year because it belongs to us and because you do not need it. You need the shape. The shape is that a woman the entire realm found unknowable was, it turned out, simply waiting her whole life for one person who could not be dazzled, who had to take her on nothing but what was true. And I was a woman who had spent her whole life being handled and overlooked. And here was the most powerful person in the kingdom treating my judgment as the most valuable thing in a room. I fell in love with her over a winter of talk in a dark, still room, and I knew it was madness. a sovereign, and a blind stillroom girl. And I let it happen anyway, which is the only reckless thing I have ever done. And I would do it again with my whole ruined eyes. She bonded me on a night at the very end of that year. A bond in the old marches is not a wedding. It is older, and it needs no witness and no priest, only scent and choosing and a mark set at the throat. She asked me first, 3 separate times, in that low, even voice, "Are you certain? Are you certain? Are you certain?" Because, she said, a thing that cannot be undone should be a thing you have to say yes to more than once. I said yes all 3 times, and she took a small tarnished signet, the seal of her house, off her own hand, and she pressed it into mine and closed my fingers over it, and she said, "So that you can always find me, even in the dark." I have it still. It is the only thing of that whole life they did not manage to take. For a little more than 2 years, I was the bonded consort of the Sovereign of the Grey Marches, and I will tell you the truth about those years, which is that they were the happiest and the most frightening of my life, because I could feel, the way you feel weather coming, that a great many powerful people did not intend to let a blind low-quarter Omega stand beside the throne. I could hear it in the rooms I was moved through, the soft displeasure, the careful, poisonous courtesy of people describing me, in front of me, as the sovereign's little pet, her blind fancy, the mistake she would tire of. I told Aveline once. She went very still. I felt the air stop moving. And she said, in a voice with no warmth left in it at all, "Let them talk. The day they do more than talk, they will answer to me." She was so certain she could protect me. That was the one thing in the whole world she was wrong about, and it is the thing that cost us everything. The man who did more than talk was her cousin. His name was Bracken Vail, and he was a Lord Regent of the Northern Holdings, and he had spent his whole life a single heartbeat from a throne that was never going to be his, while Aveline drew breath. I did not know him well. I knew his scent, dry and Swedish, like a cellar going bad under a clean waxed floor. And I knew that every time he was in a room with me, his voice was kind and his scent was not. And a woman who reads scent instead of faces learns very young to believe the scent. The fall, when it came, took 1 night. I want to slow it down, because everyone in the realm later agreed on a false version. And I am the only living person who was there for the true one. And you should have it. It was a feast night. Midsummer, the great hall full. I was not at the high table. I never was, at the large public feasts. Aveline kept me back from the crowds where a blind woman could be jostled, and I understood and I did not mind, and that keeping me back is the only reason I am alive to tell you this. I was in the small side gallery with old Hessa, who had been Aveline's nurse when Aveline was a child, and was the one other soul in that palace who had always treated me as a person. And through the wall, over the noise of 400 people, I heard the exact moment the world ended. I heard Aveline's goblet fall, not drop, fall, from a hand that had stopped working. I heard her chair go over. I heard the half-beat foot try to take her weight and fail. And I heard, under the screaming that started a breath later, one voice stay perfectly calm. One scent moved through the panic toward the high table without a flicker of fear in it, dry, Swedish, a cellar under a waxed floor. And I knew, before anyone said a word, that Bracken Vail had finally done more than talk. They said it was a seizure, a sudden failing of the brain. They said a tragedy, the last of a thinning bloodline. That was the story, and the story held, because the man who wrote it was the man who poured the cup. She did not die. That was the part he had not planned for and could not undo without a second, more obvious murder, and so he did something crueler than killing her. What the poison did, what I understood over the following days, listening at every wall I could reach, was burn the memory out of her. She woke after 3 days, and she did not know the year. She did not know the throne was in question. She did not know her own cousin's face, and she did not know me. 2 years of nights in a still room, a bond set at her own hand, a signet pressed into my palm, gone, burned to gray ash, as if it had never been. The healers said the last 3 years of her were simply erased, and that they would likely never come back, and that a sovereign who cannot remember her own reign cannot hold it. Bracken was named Lord Protector within the week. Within the month, Protector was quietly becoming Regent, and Regent was quietly becoming something that only needed a crown to be a king. And me? I was a problem with an easy solution. I was the blind Omega who claimed a bond no one had witnessed to a woman who no longer remembered making it. Do you understand how perfect that was for him? There was no one to say it had happened. The one person who could confirm my bond had had that exact memory burned out of her skull. I went to the healer's hall where they kept her in those first weeks, and I got as far as the door, and Bracken's men turned me away with the kind of gentle contempt that is worse than a blow. The blind girl, the pretender. Poor thing, they said, over my head, as if I could not hear. She really believes it. Let her down easy. And when I would not be let down easy, when I stood at that door day after day saying the same true thing, the gentleness ran out. And one gray morning they took me to the low gate and put me out of the palace with the clothes I stood in and the tarnished signet they did not know to look for, sewn into the hem of my sleeve. They did not even bother to have me killed. That is how little I was. A blind beggar woman raving about a royal bond. The story told itself. The whole realm agreed, with the ease of people agreeing to a comfortable thing, that Aveline of the Grey Marches was a tragedy, and Bracken was a steady hand, and the blind girl at the gate was mad with grief for a mistress who had merely been kind to her once. Everyone forgot her. It took less than a season, 100 years of her blood, and it took the court less than a season to fold her up and put her away like a chair no one sat in anymore. Everyone forgot her, except me. I could not forget her if you burned my memory too, because I did not keep her in my eyes, where a poison could reach. I kept her in my hands, and my ears and my nose, in the half-beat step and the cedar and iron, and the low, even voice, in a place no cup could ever reach. And a woman who keeps you somewhere that cannot be burned does not forget. She goes and finds you. It took me most of a year to find where they had hidden her, because a fallen queen is an embarrassment, and you do not keep an embarrassment where anyone can trip over it. They had sent her, memory and all, to a place the court had already forgotten twice over, the old summer palace at Elderhallow, 3 days east on the Grey Coast, a great crumbling house her family had not used in 40 years, half fallen into a wood that had come back to claim it, a ruined queen in a ruined palace, with a single old servant to keep her from wandering into the sea. It was meant to be the place she was quietly left to end. I got there on foot, on the first warm wind of spring, following a road I had to learn by the sound of my own stick, and the smell of the sea getting closer. And when I came up through the broken gate, the whole ruin was breathing. I could smell it. Wisteria gone wild over the fallen stone, and moss and wet green everywhere, and salt, and, under all of it, faint and impossible and unmistakable, cedar and cold iron. I stood in that overgrown court, and I heard, across the tangled garden, a half-beat step on old stone, and my knees nearly went out from under me, because I had found her, and because I understood in the same instant that finding her was going to be the easy part. The old servant was Hessa. Of course it was Hessa. When they folded Aveline away, the one person who refused to leave her was the old nurse who had held her as an infant. And so they let the two forgotten women rot together at the edge of the sea, which suited Bracken perfectly. Hessa knew my step before I said a word. She had known me at the palace, and she took my hands in her dry old ones, and she wept, silently, the way you weep when you have had years of practice at not being heard. And she said the thing that set the shape of the next 2 years of my life. She said, "She does not know you, child. You have to understand that before you go in. She does not know me either most days. She does not know she was ever a queen. She has the mind of a woman waked from a long fever into a stranger's life, and the healers were right. It does not come back. She said if you go in there and tell her she is a sovereign and you are her bonded love, and half the last 3 years belong to the two of you, you will only frighten a frightened woman, and she will believe you are one more person who wants something from her, because that is all anyone has ever been. She held my face. She said, if you love her, you will not tell her who she is. You will let her find it. And you may wait the rest of your life and never see her find it. Can you do that? I said yes. It was the second hardest yes of my life. The hardest one came later, so I stayed. I told them I was a herb woman down on her luck, which was true enough, and that I could keep a still room and a kitchen garden, which was also true. And Hessa, who needed the help and knew the truth and said nothing, took me on. And for the first days I did not go near her. I let her get used to a new step in the house. My stick, my particular quiet. The way you let a wild thing get used to your scent before you ever reach a hand toward it. I did not reach a hand toward her. That is the whole story of the next 2 years, if you want it in one line. I did not reach a hand toward her. I had found the one person I loved in all the world, sitting 20 feet away in a ruined garden. And I made myself keep the 20 feet, because the 20 feet were the only honest thing I had left to give her. The first time she spoke to me, she asked me who I was. Not the way she used to, that low, even certainty, but wary and tired, a woman braced for one more demand. I told her my name was Wenna, and I kept the garden. She said, you are blind. I said I was. She said, then how do you keep a garden? And I said, the same way you keep anything you cannot see. You learn it by every other part of it until you do not need the seeing. And there was a silence. And I felt the air change, the 11 inches becoming 10, and she said quietly, more to herself than to me, I think I used to know something about that. And then she caught herself and went away, the half-beat step retreating, and I stood very still in the garden, with my heart going like a bird against a window, because a door had opened 1 thread's width and slammed, and I understood exactly how long a road I had chosen. I want to tell you the shape of those 2 years, because it is the true heart of this, and everyone skips it to get to the part where the queen comes back. And the part where the queen comes back only means anything, because of the 2 years no one tells. Every day was the same, and every day was a discipline. I would work the garden and the still room, and she would drift out most afternoons, drawn to the sound of me the way she had once been drawn to the still room, though neither of us would have said so. She did not know why the blind herb woman was restful to her. I knew. Some part of her below the burned part remembered being safe near me, the way your hand remembers a shape your mind has forgotten. And I would talk, never about the past, never about us, only about the plants under my fingers and the weather I could smell coming and the small, true things of a day. And she would sit on the broken step and listen, and the half-beat foot would settle, and for an hour the tired, wary woman would go quiet, and something older would come up underneath, and I would have to hold myself very still not to say the thing that would have shattered it, because I could have. Every single day I could have said, you are Aveline, sovereign of the Grey Marches, and you loved me, and here is the signet you pressed into my hand. And every single day I did not, because a bond is not a fact you inform someone of. It is a thing they choose. And she could not choose me back if I handed her a choice already made and told her it was memory. So I cataloged her instead, the way I catalog everything. The half-beat step, the cedar and iron gone soft now with wisteria and wood smoke, the way her breath still caught and clenched at her own jaw when she could not sleep, and a new thing, a scar at her left temple where they had done whatever they did, that she pressed with 2 fingers whenever some fragment surfaced and slipped away before she could hold it. I learned that gesture as well as I had ever known anything. 2 fingers to the temple. It meant something is coming up, and I never once, in 2 years, reached out to help it come. It was hers to raise. I only ever waited. Let me give you one of those days whole, because the 2 years were made of them, and you cannot feel the whole without holding one. It was a wet green morning near the middle of the first year, and she came out to the garden earlier than usual, drawn by the sound of me turning the cold soil, and she sat on the broken step. And for a while, neither of us spoke. I could hear the improvement in her even then, months before her name came back. Her breathing had gone easier in the ruin. The clenched thing in her jaw loosened a little more with each season. And I cataloged it the way a physician would, the slow healing of a woman no one was any longer demanding anything of. That morning, she asked me what I was planting, and I told her. And I put a seed into her palm and closed her fingers over it so she could feel the shape of the thing. And she went very still at that, at the closing of her fingers over a small thing pressed into her hand. And she said, "That felt like a thing I have done before." And I held my breath. And she pressed 2 fingers to the scar at her temple, chasing it, and it slipped away the way they always did. And she let out a slow breath and said, "It is gone." And I said gently, "The ground does not mind waiting. Plant it when it comes back." I was not talking about the seed. She knew I was not talking about the seed, though she could not have said how she knew. And she turned her face toward me for a long moment, and I felt the 11 inches become 10. And then she planted the seed carefully in the cold ground, and neither of us said anything else. And it was the closest thing to happiness I had had in 2 years, and the loneliest hour of my life, both at once, because she was a foot away and a whole burned wall away, and I had chosen the wall, and I would choose it again the next morning and the morning after that. That is what patience actually is. It is not one grand act of waiting. It is choosing the wall again every single morning, with the person you love a foot away on a broken step for 700 mornings, and never once letting yourself take the thing you could so easily have taken. I do not tell you this so you will admire me. I tell you so you will understand what it cost, so that when she crossed that hall 3 years later and left me the last 10 feet, you will know she was giving me back, in front of the whole world, the exact gift I had given her every morning in the dark. There were near things. I have to tell you about the near things, or you will not believe the restraint of it. There was the night she could not sleep. I heard her, the caught breath, the pacing, half-beat step in the great cold hall. And I made valerian from the 3rd shelf, because it is always the 3rd shelf, and I brought it to her in the dark. And I told her it would not work while she clenched her jaw like that. And she went absolutely still. And she said, in a whisper, "Someone told me that once, a long time ago." Who told me that? And I stood there in the dark holding a cup, with the entire truth of both our lives balanced on the point of a single sentence. And I said, "It is only what any herb woman knows." And I felt her disappointment, and my own. And I drank the loss of that moment like the bitterest thing I have ever swallowed. And I said goodnight, and I went to my cot, and I did not sleep either. There was the afternoon she reached out without warning and touched my face, the first time she had touched me in 2 years, the first time in 3 since the bond, running her fingers over my clouded eyes the way sighted people sometimes do, wondering, and she said, "I keep thinking I have seen your face before." And every cell in my body wanted to turn my cheek into her palm and weep and say, "Yes, yes, 100 times yes you have. You knew it better than your own crown." And I held still under her hand like a wall, and I said, "Blind faces all look a little alike, my lady," and I stepped back, and I put the 20 feet between us again, because it was not time, because it was not hers yet, because the choosing had to be real, or it would be worth nothing. That was the hardest yes of my life. Not going standing under the hand of the woman I loved while she tried to remember loving me and choosing for her sake to stay a stranger one more day. It was that first summer that calls started coming up from the shore hamlet with his goats and his cheese, an 18-year-old with a good heart and no discretion whatever. And he became, without any of us deciding it, the 4th soul of our small, forgotten society. Hessa and the herb woman and the tired lady who did not know she was a queen, and now a goat herd who told us everything happening in the world and never once guessed that any of it mattered to anyone in that ruin. I liked him. He talked to me the way almost no one does, straight at me, without the softening people put into their voices for the blind. And he described the world to me without being asked. The color of the sea that morning, the ships on the horizon, in a way that was the closest I had come to sight in years. And it was Call, without knowing it, who showed me the bond was still alive in her, under the burned wall, months before her name came back. One afternoon he came up the path fast and loud, calling out some news, and startled her. A stranger's raised voice, a body coming quick out of the trees, and before I had even placed the danger, before I could get my stick up, I felt her move. The tired lady who did not know she was a queen, who did not know my name, who did not know she had ever loved anything. She came off that broken step on her half-beat foot and put herself between me and the sound, one arm out across me, her whole body turned to take whatever was coming. It was only Call. It was nothing. But I stood behind her arm with my heart going like a hammer, because her mind had forgotten me entirely and her body had not. Her body still knew, past the wall, past the poison, past 3 years, that the blind woman at her side was the one thing in the world to be stood in front of. She lowered her arm, confused at herself, and pressed the scar at her temple, and could not have told you why she had moved. I could have told her. I did not. But I knew, from that afternoon on, that she was still in there, and that she was coming, however long the road. And I kept the wall, and I kept the faith, and I waited. Old Hessa watched me do it, day after day. And one evening, by the low fire, she said the thing that kept me alive through the whole of it. She said, "I have served that woman since before she could walk, and I have never seen anyone love her the way you are loving her right now, which is to say without taking a single thing in return." She said, they all wanted something from her, all her life. Her crown, her favor, her protection, her bed. You are the only one who ever wanted her to be free, even of you. She poked the fire. She said, that is the thing that is going to bring her back if anything does. Not being told who she was, being loved so patiently that she becomes safe enough to go looking for herself. And then the old woman looked at me across the fire with her clever, tired eyes and said, "But understand, child, it may not come in time. He is not going to leave her out here forever." She was right about that too. The boy who brought the world back to our door was called Call. He was 18, a goatherd from the shore hamlet, and he brought us cheese and news in equal measure, and had no idea he was carrying either to anyone who mattered. He was the one who told us, one autumn morning, that the Lord Regent Bracken Vail had at last set a date to be crowned, not regent, king, at the midwinter court in the capital. Before the whole assembly of the marches, he was going to take the old iron crown, and the last thread of the pretense that he was merely keeping the seat warm was going to be cut. Call thought it was fine news. A coronation meant a feast day and ale in the hamlet. I stood in the garden with the frost coming, and I felt the whole careful shape of 2 years crack, straight down the middle. Because I understood two things at once, the way I understand most things, all in a single breath. I understood that the day Bracken put that crown on his head, Aveline stopped being an embarrassment quietly rotting at the edge of the sea, and started being the one loose thread that could unravel a king, and that a new king does not leave loose threads at the edge of the sea. And I understood that I was out of time. The slow, patient road I had chosen, the waiting the rest of my life for her to find herself, had just run into a wall with a date on it. She had until midwinter to come back on her own, and she was not going to make it. Tessa and I did not sleep that night. We sat by the fire and we said the unsayable thing out loud for the first time in 2 years. If Bracken meant to be crowned, he would send for her, or send men to make certain she could never be found. And either way, the quiet, safe ruin was about to stop being safe. We could run, take her east, up the coast, hide 2 more forgotten women in some other ruin. But I had listened to the world through enough walls to know that you do not outrun a king, not with a blind woman and an old one, and a queen who does not know to be afraid. Running only meant being found somewhere worse. Or there was an or, and the or was the thing I had spent 2 years refusing. I could stop waiting for her to remember. I could put the signet in her hand and tell her everything and try, in the weeks we had left, to wake by force the thing I had sworn to let her find gently. It might break her, Hessa said so plainly. The healers had warned that pushing hard at a burned mind could shatter what was left of it, leave her worse than forgotten. But the gentle way had run out of road. I sat by that fire and I understood that the two hardest yeses of my life had a third one waiting behind them, and that this one might cost her the fragile peace she had built in the ruin, and might cost me the only thing I had, her, alive, even not knowing me, and that I had to reach for it anyway, because a woman about to be quietly erased by a king deserves the chance to stand up, even if standing up is dangerous, even if she chooses, once she knows, to stand up and walk away from me. That is the difference between loving someone and keeping them. I had spent 2 years being very proud of not keeping her. Now I had to prove I meant it, that I would wake her even knowing she might wake into a self that did not want me. I went to her the next morning in the ruined garden, in the thin winter sun, and for the first time in 2 years, I did not keep the 20 feet. I crossed them. I heard her go still and wary at the change in me, the herb woman coming close, and I knelt down in front of her on the cold stone, and I took the tarnished signet out of the hem of my sleeve where it had lived for 3 years, and I put it into her hand and closed her fingers over it the exact way she had once closed mine. And I said the thing I had held in my mouth for 2 years, until it had worn a groove there. I said, "Your name is Aveline. You are the sovereign of the Grey Marches, and the man who is about to be crowned in your place is the cousin who poisoned you to take your throne and burn the last 3 years out of you, so that no one would remember they were stolen. And 3 of those years were mine. You found me in a still room. You talked to me all one winter because I was the only person alive who could not be dazzled by you. You bonded me at your own hand, and you asked me 3 times if I was certain, and I said yes 3 times. And you took that signet off your own finger and pressed it into my hand and said, so that you can always find me, even in the dark. She was not breathing. I said, I have spent 2 years letting you not know me, because a love you are told about is a cage, and I wanted you free even of me. But he means to make himself king, and a king does not leave a fallen queen alive at the edge of the sea, and I am out of time and out of the right to keep you gentle. So I am telling you the truth, and I am putting it in your hand, and whatever you do with it, even if you walk into the sea, even if you send me away, it is yours now. You are not forgotten. I never forgot you for 1 single day. And then I did the thing I had not let myself do in 2 years. I reached up, and I laid my thumb against the scar at her left temple, over the place they had burned her, and I held it there. I felt her whole body go rigid under my hand, and then I felt her begin to shake, a deep, hard shaking that had nothing to do with cold, and her breath came in a way I had never heard from her, ragged and tearing, and I thought, for one falling moment, that I had shattered her, that Hessa had been right, and I had reached into a healing wound and torn it open, and I was going to lose her a second time and by my own hand. And then she made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when a door that has been walled up for years is broken open from the inside, all at once. Grief and terror and something enormous coming up through both. And her hand came up and closed hard over my hand at her temple, holding it there, holding it harder, as if she could press the memory back in through the scar. And she said, in a voice I had not heard in 3 years, the low, even voice with all its certainty come roaring back into it at once. She said, Wenna, just my name. She had not been told my name that morning as anything but a herb woman's. Wenna. She reached past the whole burned wall and pulled out the one thing they had tried hardest to take. And it was me. And she said my name the way she used to say it in the dark of the still room. And I broke completely. And for the first time in 2 years, I stopped being a wall. And I put my face against her shaking shoulder. And I wept. And she wrapped both arms around me in the cold, ruined garden. and held on like a woman who has just remembered she has something to hold. She did not come back all at once or all the way. I will not lie to you and say the 2 lost years came back whole. Some of them never did. And there are still mornings, even now, when a thing she should know is simply not there. A gray gap in her, and she presses the scar at her temple. And I put my hand over hers and we wait for it together. And sometimes it comes and sometimes it does not. And we have made our peace with the ones that do not. But the self came back. The sovereign came back into the tired, wary woman over that one shaking hour in the garden and the long night after it. Her mind, her will, her cold, clear reckoning of exactly what her cousin had done, and exactly how thin the ice was under all 3 of us. By the gray dawn, she was Aveline again, sitting by Hessa's low fire with the signet on her finger where it belonged, and she was not weeping anymore. She was thinking, and when Aveline of the Grey Marches thinks in that particular still way, it is a dangerous thing to be her enemy. She turned her face toward me. She had learned in one night to turn toward my voice the way I turn toward a step. And she said, "I remembered you first." Do you understand what that means? Out of a whole stolen reign, 100 years of blood, a crown, a war, the first thing that came back through the wall was your name. She said, "You spent 2 years teaching me I was safe enough to go looking for myself." She said, and the self I found, the very center of it, the thing they could not burn no matter how deep they poured, was you. And I could not answer because there are things that are too large to put a voice around. And she knew that about me. She had always known that about me, and she let the silence stand. And in the silence, she reached over and found my hand. And that was the answer for both of us. We could not stay at Elder Hallow. Call's news had a date on it, and Aveline understood better than anyone that the moment Bracken felt the crown truly within reach, he would tie off his loose threads. But she did not want to run, and I did not want her to. A woman who runs is a woman who agrees she is a ghost. Aveline of the Grey Marches was not going to slink up the coast and hide in one more ruin. She was going to walk into the midwinter court in front of the whole assembly of the Marches, on the very day her cousin reached for the crown, and she was going to make 400 people who had agreed to forget her remember all at once, in the one place he could not have her quietly killed, in the full light, before every lord and lady of the realm, where a murder becomes a war. It was madness. It was exactly the kind of madness she had been born for, and I could hear, in the low, even voice laying it out by the fire, the sovereign fully returned. And I loved her so much, in that moment I could barely breathe. But there was a problem, and it was me. Because who was going to confirm her? A fallen queen walks into a court claiming she was poisoned and erased, and the man on the dais says, "The poor woman is mad. Look, even her own memory failed." And it becomes his word against a ghost's. She needed a witness. She needed the one person who had been outside the side gallery the night the goblet fell, who had heard the calm scent move through the panic, who had stood at the healer's door and been called a pretender, who had carried the truth, unburnable, for 3 years. She needed the blind Omega everyone had already agreed was mad with grief. She turned to me by the fire, and she did not order it the way a sovereign could have. She asked. She said, "I cannot ask you to stand up in that hall. They will say you are a mad blind beggar. He will try to break you in front of everyone, and if it goes wrong, he will not let either of us leave." She said, "You have given me 2 years and my whole self back, and asked for nothing. I will not take this too unless you give it. Will you stand up with me?" And I said the 4th hardest yes of my life, which was also the easiest, because it was the first thing in 3 years I got to choose out loud. I said yes. We came to the capital at midwinter, the 3 of us and the goat boy Call, who had refused to be left behind, and who turned out to have the loyalty of 10 men in an 18-year-old body. The coronation hall was the great cold heart of the palace, where I had once ground herbs, and I knew it. I knew the echo of it, the distance of the high dais, by the way sound came back off the far wall, 400 people packed in. The whole realm gathered to watch Bracken Vail make himself a king. Aveline went cloaked and hooded through a side door with Hessa. I went in the front as what I was, a blind beggar woman come to see a crowning. Because a blind beggar woman is exactly the sort of thing no one looks at twice. And Bracken's men, if they thought of me at all, thought me long since dead in a ditch. I felt his scent from across the whole hall when I came in. Dry, sweetish, a cellar under a waxed floor. And it was thick with a satisfaction so complete it was almost sleepy. He thought he had won. He had every reason to. He was one iron crown away from 100 years of someone else's blood. I stood at the very back where I have always stood, and I listened to the whole slow theater of it. The speeches, the false grief for the tragic sovereign, the smooth machine of a lie that had run so long everyone had stopped hearing it as a lie. And I waited for my moment, which I would know not by sight, but the way I know everything, by the change in the air. The moment the crown left its cushion and the hall drew one breath. And in that breath, before the metal could touch his head, I heard, from a side door, a half-beat step come out onto the stone. And the whole hall, 400 people at once, stopped breathing. And I smiled, at the back, in the dark behind my ruined eyes, because I did not need to see it. I had been listening for that step for 3 years. You know the rest. Or nearly. She threw back the hood and she was Aveline of the Grey Marches, alive, whole-eyed, upright, wearing her own house signet on her hand, and a hall full of people who had agreed she was a tragedy had to reckon, in one heartbeat, with a ghost that was plainly not dead and plainly not mad. Bracken did exactly what I knew he would. I heard it, the smooth pivot, the practiced pity. He said she was a poor, broken creature, an imposter, that the true sovereign had died of a failing brain, and here was some sad mummer sent to disturb a solemn day. And the hall wavered, because a hall always wavers toward the comfortable story. And for one long moment, I felt it tipping back toward him. And that is when Aveline said, "Then let my own memory be tested before you all. Ask me a thing only the true sovereign could know, and if I fail, take me for a mummer and be done." And Bracken, too confident, too pleased, made the one mistake of his careful life. He said, "Very well, name the one who supposedly stood closest to the throne in those years you claim to remember. Name your own great secret." He meant it as a trap. He was certain the burned mind would fail. He did not know the wall had been broken open in a ruined garden, and Aveline turned her whole body toward the very back of the hall, toward a blind beggar woman no one had looked at once, and she said, in the low, even voice that carried to every stone, "Her name is Wenna Crowe. She is a blind omega of the low quarter. She kept my still room, and then she kept my heart. I bonded her at my own hand, and gave her my signet so she could find me in the dark. And she found me, when every one of you had forgotten I existed." And she began to walk down the whole length of that hall toward me. I heard 400 people turn to look at me at once. It is a particular sound, that, a great soft rush of cloth and breath, and it broke over me like a wave, and I stood in it, at the back, and did not move, because she was crossing the hall on the half-beat step, and I had waited 3 years to let her. And 10 feet from me, she stopped. I felt her stop, and I understood why. And I loved her for it more than for anything else she had ever done, because it was the thing I had taught her without ever meaning to. She did not close the last of the distance and seize me and hold me up as a prize to win her argument. She stopped in front of the whole realm, and she left the last 10 feet for me to cross or not cross, because she knew, she had learned it in a garden, that a blind girl who had once been handled and overlooked and put out a low gate must never again be taken, only ever chosen, and must be seen to choose in the full light, so that no one in that hall, and no one in my own heart, could ever say I had been swept up like a thing. She left the 10 feet, and in the low, even voice, loud enough now for every soul in that hall to hear, she said, "I will not take a step you did not ask me to. You crossed a kingdom to find me when I was no one. If you will have me back, sovereign or beggar, it is all one. Then come the last of the way yourself, and let them all see that no one is making you. I have told you. I am a woman who reads the world by the change in the air. I will tell you that I have never, before or since, felt the air of a room the way I felt it. In that hall, 400 people holding one breath, and 10 feet of cold stone, and at the end of it, the whole of my life, standing on a half-beat foot, waiting. And I found, for the first time in 3 years, that I was not afraid of a single person in that room. I had crossed a kingdom in the dark on a stick, 10 feet of lit stone toward the one step I could find anywhere in the world was nothing. It was the easiest walk of my life. I crossed the 10 feet myself, alone, on my own feet, tapping the stone once to be sure of it, and then not needing the stick at all, because her scent was the truest road I have ever walked, cedar and sea salt and cold iron. And I stopped in front of her, close enough now to feel the warmth come off her, close enough to reach up, which I did, and lay my thumb once more against the scar at her temple, the way I had in the garden, so that she would know, past all doubt, that it was me. And I said, so that the whole hall could hear the blind beggar they had all pitied say it plain, I never forgot you. Not for one single day. I will have you back. Sovereign or beggar, it is all one to me. It always was. And Aveline of the Grey Marches, in front of the man who had erased her, and the 400 who had let him, took my face in both her hands, the way she had that first winter she was too proud to admit she wanted to. And she pressed her forehead to mine, and she said the 3 words she had needed 3 years to be able to say. 3 words that are a small thing from anyone else, and the largest thing in the world from a woman who had truly once entirely forgotten, to a woman who has never in her life been able to see. She said, I see you. I will not draw out what happened to Bracken, because he is the least interesting part of this, and he had already lost the moment he asked the wrong question of a woman who had come back through a burned wall. A poisoned cup leaves a trace, if anyone with power ever cares to look for it, and there were people in that hall who had only forgotten Aveline because forgetting was safe, and who remembered their duty very quickly once forgetting stopped being safe. He did not put on the crown that day. He did not put it on any day. That is all I will say, except that no one, in the end, had to raise a hand. A lie only rules as long as everyone agrees to keep believing it, and the whole hall stopped agreeing in the space of one blind woman crossing 10 feet of stone. Old Hessa lived to see it and cried the entire time, and told everyone afterward that she had known me for a queen's own love the first day I walked into that palace, which was not quite true, but I let her have it. Call the Goat Boy became, in time, the least likely captain of a sovereign's guard the Marches had ever seen, and is fiercely proud of it, and still brings me cheese. We were bonded again, properly, the second time, because Aveline said a thing worth doing once badly, and once well should be done twice, in the spring, at Elder Hallow, which she would not tear down and would not repair, but keeps exactly as it was, wild wisteria over fallen stone, because she says it is the only place she ever became a whole person instead of a crown. It is our summer palace now, the ruin. We go there when the court gets too loud. She reads to me in the overgrown garden, and I keep the still room. And she has learned my hand so well that whole evenings pass between us in the dark with never a word. Her palm in my palm, the half-beat step I can find in a country of 10,000 crossing a floor to sit beside me. She describes the world to me now, the way Call once did, without my ever having to ask, the color of the wisteria in the failing light, the ships far out on the gray water, the exact gray of a sky I will never see, not because I need it, but because she has learned that the way she has of naming a thing is its own kind of touch. And I keep every description she has ever given me the way I keep the signet, somewhere no fever could ever reach. And every night before the lamp goes out, she takes my hand and presses my thumb to the scar at her temple, herself, so that I will know the memory is still there, that she still has it, that she still has me. It is the last thing she does before she sleeps. I have never once had to ask her for it. I am still blind. I will always be blind. That is not a wound that love heals, and I would not have you think it is. What changed was never my eyes. What changed is that I finally lived beside the one person who understood that I had been seeing clearly and completely the whole time, and who spent 3 years and a whole burned self learning to see me back. If you want to know what really happened between us in that ruined garden, the long, slow spring of it, everything the 20 feet and the 2 years and the held 10 feet had kept back, the parts I could never show you here, the full uncut chapter is waiting on my Patreon. The link is in the description. And on the first true morning of this spring, Aveline found me in the still room at Elder Hollow, grinding rue on the 3rd shelf where it has always lived. And she stood in the doorway a while on her half-beat foot and let me feel her there, the way she learned to. And she did not speak, because she has learned that I hear her better than any voice. She came and stood behind me and laid her hands over mine on the stone, and I turned my face up toward her, my ruined pale eyes that have never seen her and never will. And she read in my face the thing I have never needed to write or say. And she said it, the way she has said it every single day since a blind beggar crossed 10 feet of a coronation hall. The 3 words that mean more from her than from anyone who has ever lived, because she is the one who forgot, and I am the one who cannot see. And between the two of us, we have finally completely learned how. I see you.